What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over something a little bit different for the items than we went over last time. Specifically, we're going to be going over weapons in our platform fighter tutorial series. So I'm considering items and weapons different. So every weapon will be an item, but not every item will be a weapon. And what I mean by that is we had our two pickups that we could use the last time. And even though they didn't really do anything, we knew we were using them because they were being destroyed. That's what we told them to do. We could do whatever with that. We could heal our player's health. We could, create some sort of special effect. But there will also be weapons. Think of like the baseball bat from Super Smash Brothers and different things like that. So this long pillar that I have here is our weapon. In this case, I can pick it up and then I carry it around with me. When I go to use it again, I can't do anything at the current time, but what we'll end up doing in the next episode is performing the weapons logic. And so we can now pick things up that don't get destroyed right away and, go to actually use them. And the reason I'm separating a weapon from like an item is that they could be different. So the way I'm thinking of it here is like this. If I am to pick up an item and throw it, or press the use button once, and then that is all that that item does, I'm considering that just flat out an item. It's not to say it isn't necessarily a weapon, but when I say weapon, I'm referring to like a sword or something. We're going to be carrying it around, and I can continuously use it until it either breaks or we throw it, whatever we want the logic to be. And so they are different, and I'm considering them different types because their functionality might be a little bit different. Like an item may not need like break damage and things like that. So you can set it up however you'd like. If you want all your items to be the same, you don't have to separate these into different classes like I'm going to. But regardless, today we're still going to be going over kind of how to set up stuff for these other types of items, which will be important no matter which route you go. And we're going to go over not performing an attack when you're picking up an item. Like when you're playing a platform fighter and you are to use an item, you can see here with this triangle I've got down here, I can't use it when I have this item currently. And that is because of just some of the logic that we have set up that we haven't finished the system yet. But let's look at it again. So before, in the previous episode, if we were to use our pickup button to pick up an item, then what we'd actually do is attack and pick up and use the item. Well, in the case of this, we want to prioritize picking up and or using the item over doing the basic attack. So to do that, you can see that I've used it and the attack animation did not go off. Of course, this means I still can attack if I'm doing it away from any items or weapons. So we'll be going over all that today. So consider this just items part 2, specifically what I'm calling weapons, but you can set it up however you'd like. Just know that this is items part 2. Okay, and with that, we're going to get started. So if you'd like to get caught up, feel free to click this icon in the top right corner. There's plenty more for us to do, but that'll get you caught up to where we currently are and what we currently have done. I'll also leave just the first episode of items right here. That should honestly be fine if that's all you care about. You shouldn't have to watch the entire series if you don't want to. I think this will get the concepts across well enough for you. And with that, we're going to go into the code and we're going to make a few changes, as usual, to kind of set everything up correctly. So let's look at a few things. So we have base item.h and base item.cpp. So if you have been following the series directly, then how this works is we have an item type, and the item type is basically going to determine some things like when we pick up the item, we'll kind of know what type it is, what functions we have with it, what abilities we can do with it, that sort of thing. And so we have this E_sword that I've now added. And it's just your basic sword. You could call it pickup sword or you could give it a special name. That way it's a little bit distinguished from potentially other swords or weapons in the game. But for now, basic sword is fine. So I've called mine sword. And then we have use item was a function that we had in the previous episode. And we did not have anything in the parentheses here. This is new. But we had void use item, and that was it. And what we would do is if we use the light attack, and we were overlapping with an item, we would call use item. And what it would do is, in the blueprint for the item, I actually don't have it in the base item BP because technically we won't ever want a base item BP to be spawned. It's just a wrapper class. We want the children to be spawned. So for example, if I went into like health pickup, even though we didn't do anything with it yet, theoretically, we have use item and it performs the logic of the item. So in this case, you know, for something like a weapon where we're going to pick it up, we don't want to destroy it right away. We're going to pick it up and attach it to a character, that sort of thing. And so to do this, and in general, for any item that we may want to use, we are going to want to know what character or player has chosen to use this object. For doing something like destroying it, like we were in the previous episode, it makes no difference. When it gets called, that's what happens, plain and simple. However, if we get into assist trophies or weapons like this, or things that we don't want to hurt the using character, then we're going to want to know who is the owner of this character, or who is the character that used this. So we're going to update this use item function, and we're going to pass in a SSB template character pointer. So basically your base character pointer. That's what the asterisk is. Owner equals null pointer. And what this is a default or optional parameter. And what it means is this doesn't have to be filled out. So for example, if the item on the ground is a sword and we call use item, well, we're going to want to know the owner, and we're going to want to attach the sword to the character that gets passed in here. This is the owner of the sword now. However, say that an item somehow gets used another way. So say we had like an explosive barrel on the ground, and punching it or using it makes it explode, but also you can throw something at it and use it that way. And maybe they have different functionality depending. If you throw it and you don't want the owner to be immune to the damage, then you don't have to pass in an owner. The owner will be null pointer. So basically there's no owner, and then the logic can be different. So we're just kind of thinking ahead here. We don't necessarily need that for right now, but we are going to need to have the owner here regardless. So this null pointer is just an extra bonus of being able to have no owner and still perform logic. Regardless, make sure you add the owner here in the use item, and that'll become important later. All right, base item BP base item CPP is exactly the same, so nothing to worry about there. Let's go to our SSB template character.h. And now you can see where I scrolled. We had something in the previous episode called overlapped item, and that was the item we were currently overlapping with. Now, if you wanted to be, extra specific about it, when you overlap an item, you could display text to the screen, kind of how like RPGs do it, or FPS games do it when you're trying to change weapons or something, where it tells you, oh, hold this to switch it out, or hold this to pick it up. The platform fighter games don't seem to do that often, but sometimes they do. But they don't seem to do it all the time, so before, we were just using it to determine, if we were colliding with it and if we could use it. That's fine for now. What we also are going to need is an actual reference to the item that we have equipped, and they will be different. So our overlapped item will be any items on the ground that we are overlapping with and can pick up. But the equipped item will be any items that we actually pick up and are using actively. And so they can be different, and you can potentially switch out an equipped item with an overlapped item if that's what you want to do. So I've just added a new pointer of a base item, and I've called it equipped item. I put them right next to each other so you can see them. And that's pretty much it for that. If we go into the CPP file, we can scroll down, set our default parameters if we want. Default values. So equipped item equals null pointer. And now let's scroll down a bit. Let's go to our basic attack. Okay. So if you've been following this series directly, you'll be familiar with this sort of thing. right here. It's changed a little bit because it's changed. This use item now has this passed into it. But all of this will have been done in a previous episode. And so what this was doing was determining if we're overlapping an item. And if we are, we're going to use the item. However, otherwise we're going to, determine if we want to use our basic attack or if it's a charge attack, that sort of thing. And we were doing if overlapped item not equal to null pointer, or just if overlapped item, either way. But this time, we know, at this point we're in the character class, so if we're using this item when we press the basic attack, we know who the owner of this item is going to be. It's going to be the character that's pressing this button. And so, if the overlapped item is not null pointer, overlapped item, use item, this. Because remember, use item takes in an SSB template character now. So this is a reference to the class that we are in. We're in SSB template character. So the character that used basic attack, this is the character that gets passed in. That is now the new owner of this overlapped item. Really, here we could set our equipped item. It's a little bit trickier than that, though, because we may not want to actually set that here. We may not want to be able to equip all items. Like the health pickup is one that I think of as an example. As soon as you use it, it instantly gets, it does its purpose and then it goes away. So we have to be careful. We don't necessarily want to equip every item. And we'll have to figure that out item by item and check it out as our little item mini-series within this tutorial series moves along. But for now, what I've done is I've just made sure that there's not an overlapped item, there is an overlapped item, and if there is, use it. And then I've surrounded this entire block with this other if statement. We haven't filled out anything in the if yet because we haven't actually set up any of the logic for the specific items. But in here, what we'll probably do is we'll switch overlapped item to like pickup item here. And then we'll have use item as a separate function here. So basically we'll just rename this because we can pick up an item by doing this. And if we want to use the item automatically when it's picked up, we can just call, use item as soon as it's picked up. Otherwise, what we'll do is if there is an equipped item and we use the basic attack, that is how we will use our actual item. So in the case of the sword, if we're overlapping the sword and we use our basic attack, we want to pick it up and add it to a character. This is working. But if we rename this to pickup item, it would make more sense in that case. We're not really using the sword, we're just picking it up. However, in here, in this use item, you'll see that we do end up setting equipped item. And I'll show you that in a few minutes. So say that the sword is already equipped. Well, if it's equipped, we don't want to use any of this logic. We don't want to try and pick something up. We don't want to try and use a certain standard attack if we have our sword. We want to do the sword's logic. So we really would like to call equipped item, use item here, as opposed to the term use item. It's a small change, but what I'm just saying is picking up an item and using an item can be two different things. They can be the same, but they can be two different things. That's everything that we need for the code here. Let's go into Unreal, because there's a few things we have to do. So let's look at what we have already. We have our base item BP that we made. And the way that the base item BP worked is it was a basic wrapper class, which it had a static mesh with nothing on it, since the children themselves would have the mesh. And it had a collider that could be changed and moved to work with all the children as well. Then in the event graph, we basically just made sure that a character was overlapping with it, and if they were, then cast and set the overlapped item to be this item. And then when that overlap ends, reset the overlapped item to be nothing. That way we know that we're not overlapping with any items and we can't pick them up. Thus, if you're performing an action, such as using your basic attack, you use that move as opposed to trying to pick up an item. So that's not bad. And that is a child of our base item code class. Now, what we were doing and what we did in the previous episode was if we go into our health pickup, like I said, we call use item. We have nothing else in here. We just call use item and we perform the logic in here for this class. and this is a child of base item BP. So these are like consumable items and that sort of thing. Now let's go into our sword and see how it's different. Well, really, let's go into something I called base weapon BP. I made this slightly different because you have to remember that I'm thinking of base item and base weapon as kind of different. Base item is something I pick up and it, I can use it right away. Whereas base weapon is really something that I'm going to keep using over time until it breaks or I drop it. Or it's, thrown, I'm forced to drop it for any numerous amount of reasons. And so with that, I've made a base weapon class that we can make all weapons children of. This is not required. You could make all weapons children of base item as well, but it doesn't hurt to separate it if you plan to keep their logic separate in the game. So what I've done is just right-clicked on base item BP, create child blueprint class, and called it base weapon BP. Let's take a look at that guy first. Now, it is a child of base item BP. And base item BP is a wrapper class, and this is also a wrapper class, but it's just more specific. So any weapons will automatically have this logic done to them. Okay? So I call event use item, just like you would for any other thing. Okay? And then I take the owner that's passed into it now, and I set the owner of this object to the character. So in this case, all I do is set owner, and I set it to the new owner that comes in. I'm going to do the logic down below it so you can see. You don't have to do this twice, obviously. And then we call attach weapon item. Now, this is an event that I've made. I've left it blank in the base weapon BP, but you'll see that I end up using it in the sword weapon BP. So let me explain what this does. Basically, this is just an event I made where it takes in the character reference and it knows what to attach each weapon to. So each weapon may be different. Maybe I hold the bat a certain way, but the sword is held differently. If they're not held differently, you can always use the same socket. However, not everything is going to be held the same. You can see as you play platform fighters, when they pick up weapons a lot of time, there will be multiple points that they pick them up, or even different animations that they use when holding certain weapons. And with that, we need to potentially attach these weapons to different points, different sockets, or, snap them different ways in the rules, those sort of things. And so to get that looking correctly, what I've done is I've taken the owner, I've made an event attach weapon item. So all I've done is add custom event right here. I got this guy, I renamed it to attach weapon item, and then I've gone ahead and added an input parameter of SSB template character object reference. And if you want to get that, it's just like this. Now, once you've done that, you'll have it here. We don't want to fill it out again, because if we fill it out, that's going to happen for all weapons, all children of this class. And we don't necessarily want that. Even if we do want to attach all weapons, like the whole reason we're doing this use item logic in this base weapon, we may want to attach them at different points, or we may want to attach them and manually update their position based on certain variables, like what character it is, or other things like that. And so I'm going to leave it blank. I do have it here, but I'm leaving it blank, and we'll fill it out in the children of base weapon BP. But call this new event that you made and pass in the owner as the character reference. Now, just some other simple things we should do. Once we pick up the weapon, we have this thing called pickup collider. And really, this is just meant to be the collider that's used to pick it up off the ground. The actual collider for collision will be different, so you don't have to worry about that for now. But once we picked it up, we want to set the pickup collider to no collision. Now, if we end up dropping this or having it removed from our hands for any reason, then we'll want to re-enable collision. But we don't want to do any sort of overlapping logic or allowing other characters to get the ability to pick it up off you if you're close enough to them, and silly stuff like that. So really, just disabling the collision on the pickup collider is our best route here. And the way you do that is you can drag your pickup collider in, set collision enabled, and just have no collision selected. lastly, remember I said we would be setting our equipped item? This is where I've decided to do it for the moment because I want to make sure it's attached and the collision was set up properly before equipping it. However, you could do it in the other order as long as you're careful. All we do is we drag off our owner one more time and we set equipped item right here. We get this node and then we just have to give a reference to self. Very simple. And drag that in. Okay. Cool. And so now, here's our base weapon BP. And what we're going to do is make a child of that guy, create child blueprint class, and create a sword weapon BP. Now, I've given it this random mesh that looks somewhat like a sword. Not exactly. It's just a basic mesh that I've chosen. But it works because I didn't put in any actual weapon assets this time around. So it's close enough for now. Okay, I've set the item type to be sword in the class defaults. And then I have the collider, which is the same size as the previous colliders because this sword is honestly gigantic and huge. But you can resize the collider as well if you'd like, if you have the size that you're happy with. And so if we go into our event graph, now that we set up the base weapon BP, and you can see that this is a child of base weapon BP, we don't have to do any of this logic. And it just is going to make our lives so much easier as we make more and more weapons to not have to disable collision on the colliders or set the owner for each individual object. Instead, these are the only nodes I have in my sword weapon BP. So now that this is a child, I can call any custom events in the parents. So we can call event attach weapon item. And it has the character reference. So that gets called, remember, in here when we use the item. So say we use the item, we use the basic attack when we're near this item. We can go to pick it up, and then it's going to call attach weapon item. So it's going to attach it to our character. And this is pretty simple how we do it. So we drag off of our character reference and we get mesh. And then you drag off of, well, actually, I like to just do attach actor to component here, as opposed to trying to search for it with the mesh attached. You can bring the mesh in as the parent. This is the component that's referring to, attach actor to component. So we want to attach self, which it is by default. So this sword to the component, which is the parent, which is the mesh, which is the mesh of our character. And that is exactly what we want to attach it to, because we're going to make a socket that we can use. Okay? So for the socket name, you see that I put in melee weapon socket. You could be as specific with this as you want. So if you have, 10 different melee weapons and they all should attach at different spots, or, maybe hold one in your right hand, one in your left hand, you're going to need different sockets for those. And the way we make sockets is we go to our character. You can go to any of your characters. Mannequin BP is the main character that I've been using. So I'll go there. And you can go to your mesh and go to the skeletal mesh if you want by double clicking this. You can also just search for this file. There's a ton of ways you can get to this thing. Now, when you're in here, there's a lot you can do with sockets, and I've actually gone over some of them in other series, like playing animations and linking it up or moving it based on sockets. I did not go that advanced right now. We probably will get there more in the future. But all I've done for now is basically you want to find a good spot where you would feel comfortable if the character was holding something there. Like if this is a sword, and in this case it's like a one-handed sword, then I know that I want to put the socket somewhere where the sword would look good. Now, honestly, this is even a little bit too far in the wrist for me. I should probably move this socket over somewhere like that, but it doesn't really matter for now. This is just an example. And so find somewhere where you want it to be. Like I think mine is actually a child of left hand as a whole. Right. So for left hand, all I've done is I've right-clicked on the bone that I want. I said, okay, I'm happy with this. Left hand is where I want the character to hold it. I can right-click on it, and I can add socket. Once you do, you'll get something that says like new socket right here, and then you'll want to rename it. Right-click, rename socket, and you can call it whatever you want. I call it melee weapon socket because if we don't end up putting in more sockets for melee weapons, then, you know, we're taken care of. We know that all melee weapons are going to use this socket. Now, once you have it in there, you can move it around like you saw me doing. It's pretty simple. But otherwise, if you're happy with it, then you can go to the sword weapon BP, put in the socket name here. For location rule, you can kind of change this. You can change this stuff to whatever looks right for you. But for me, I was going for the whole like bobbing with the character as they walk and going with their animation. And to do that, you snap location, or location rule is snap to target because it's going to be snapped to the character's hand. So that one we probably almost definitely want. The rotation rule, you probably don't want to snap because it will stay directly with the hand. So if the hand flips, the sword will completely flip, which might be a little bit dramatic. We might not need all that. So if you want the little bob that I have, let's say we go in here and we pick up our sword. Okay, and you can see how it moves as I walk. If you want that sort of effect, that's keep world, because we want to keep the orientation that it had by default, but we want it to move with the way our character is moving and the way the animation is. You don't have to do that. You can feel free to snap it. There's a bunch of stuff you could do to make it work, but that's just what I think looks the nicest with what we have right now. So that's what I'm doing. I'm using keep world for the rotation, and then keep relative for the scale is fine. You could also snap that if you want. And then weld simulated bodies is also fine for now. Okay, and lastly, at this point you're pretty much done, but lastly what we are going to do is add it to our level. So I've already done it, but it's very simple to do. If you just go into your levels, for example, mine is the training room that I normally use here, then you can literally drag your object into the level. Just like this. Sword weapon BP. And I've already got one, so we can move this one somewhere else. The important part is that your X value is exactly where your other X values are, or on some sort of acceptable plane, because you don't want it being somewhere that is unreachable. And so I can just put it up there if I want. Save this. And if I go back to my main menu, when I load this up one more time. All right, so if we go into our game, then we'll test everything out. So here's our new sword up in the top left. We should be able to jump to it off this platform, in which case we can pick it up perfectly fine. We're good to go there. Now let's see if we can get another character to use their light attack. I believe this is the light attack. I forget exactly which attack is which for each player, but I believe this is correct. And yep, you can see that this player also picked up a sword. We didn't have to do any sort of extra input action stuff for the players, even on keyboard mode, because of the fact that the characters are, all this logic is done by pressing the button that's the basic attack, which we already have in the character BP for all of our characters and all of our players. So you can play with all these guys on one input device like a keyboard, and they will still be able to pick up items right away. So there you go, guys. That's pretty much all I got for this episode. The next episode will actually be covering using the items more so than what we did in the previous episode. So the previous episode, like I said, we were just destroying them. And the next episode will be actually using them, so defining logic that can get called and perform for both items and weapons. We'll cover them both because we'll keep it at a simple level. And then for more advanced items, we may need to have individual episodes on, which will be fun. But I think that's all we got for now, guys. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. That does more for me in the channel than anything else you can do. It's completely free, and I really appreciate it. I also want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon supporters and subscribers. Thank you guys so much for everything that you do and the incredible love and support. I can't wait to see where this series goes, and really all of them. I love them so much. If you had any issues with this episode or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. It's completely free, and I'll be happy to assist you when I can and get you sorted out. Alright, guys, like I said, that's all I got. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.